I'm Margaret, 67 years old, and I never thought my only son would cut me out of his life after everything I sacrificed for him. When Thomas texted me saying I wouldn't be joining them on the cruise because his wife wanted to keep it just family, I felt my heart shatter. This was just 3 weeks after I had paid for their new house in full. What happened next changed everything between us, perhaps forever. Before I continue with my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you love, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories that might help you feel less alone. My journey as a mother began 38 years ago when I gave birth to Thomas, my only child. His father, Richard, was a hard-working man who unfortunately passed away when Thomas was only 4 years old. A sudden heart attack took him from us, leaving me to raise our son alone. I was devastated but knew I had to be strong for Thomas. He needed me more than ever. We struggled financially in those early years. Richard had a small life insurance policy, but it wasn't enough to support us long-term. I worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. During the day, I was a receptionist at a local dental office, and in the evenings I cleaned offices in the business district. It was exhausting, but I was determined to give Thomas a good life. Despite our limited resources, I made sure Thomas never felt deprived. I saved every penny I could for his education, often going without new clothes or small luxuries for myself. When Thomas needed braces, I took on a 3rd weekend job at a grocery store. When he wanted to join the baseball team, I found a way to pay for the uniform and equipment. His happiness was always my priority. Thomas was a bright child who excelled in school. By the time he reached high school, he was at the top of his class. I was so proud watching him receive academic awards, knowing all our sacrifices were paying off. He was accepted to several prestigious universities, and although the tuition was daunting, I encouraged him to choose the best school for his future. To pay for his college education, I sold our small house and moved into a modest apartment. The proceeds from the sale, combined with my savings and a second mortgage, covered his tuition at an Ivy League university. I never told Thomas how much I struggled during those years. I wanted him to focus on his studies without worrying about me. After college, Thomas landed a job at a respected financial firm. His career advanced quickly, and he soon became one of the youngest vice presidents in the company's history. I watched with pride as he built his professional life, even though he moved to a city 300 miles away. When Thomas was 32, he met Isabelle at a charity gala. She came from a wealthy family with connections in the finance industry. She was beautiful, sophisticated, and clearly accustomed to luxury. Thomas was smitten immediately. Within 6 months, they were engaged. I had some reservations about Isabelle from our first meeting. While she was polite, there was a coldness beneath her perfect smile. She asked very few questions about Thomas's childhood or our life together, seeming more interested in discussing her family's vacation homes and social connections. Still, Thomas was happy, and that was all that mattered to me. Their wedding was an extravagant affair at a 5-star hotel. Isabelle's parents covered most of the costs, though I insisted on contributing what I could. During the reception, I noticed how Isabelle's mother, Vivian, barely acknowledged me. When I tried to join a conversation with her and other family members, they subtly shifted away, excluding me from their circle. After the wedding, Thomas and Isabelle purchased a luxurious condominium in an exclusive neighborhood. I visited them a few times but always felt like an intruder. Isabelle would make subtle comments about my clothes or my accent, making it clear I didn't fit into their world. Thomas seemed oblivious to these interactions, or perhaps he chose to ignore them. Around this time, I received an unexpected windfall. My brother, who had built a successful construction business, passed away and left me his entire estate. Suddenly, at 65 years old, I found myself financially secure for the first time in my life. The inheritance included a substantial amount of cash, investment properties, and shares in my brother's company. I decided to use some of this money to help Thomas and Isabelle. They had been talking about buying a larger house in preparation for starting a family, and I wanted to contribute. When I offered to help with the down payment, Thomas seemed genuinely touched. Isabelle's reaction was more calculating, suddenly showing interest in spending time with me and asking detailed questions about my brother's estate. They found a beautiful house in an upscale neighborhood, priced at $1.5 million. Initially, I had planned to contribute $200,000 toward the down payment. However, during a dinner where Isabelle described their financial challenges, I impulsively offered to pay for the entire house. The words left my mouth before I had fully considered the implications, but the joy on Thomas's face convinced me it was the right decision. Looking back, I should have recognized the red flags. After I committed to buying the house, Isabelle became increasingly controlling about when and how I could visit. Thomas called less frequently, and our once close relationship began to fade. Still, I told myself this was natural as he built his own family, and I looked forward to being part of their lives in their new home. The closing process for Thomas and Isabelle's house took about a month. During this time, I transferred the full amount to the escrow account and signed all the necessary paperwork. I had decided to put the house in their names directly, wanting them to have complete ownership without any strings attached. My financial advisor cautioned against such a large gift without legal protections, but I insisted. This was for my son, and I trusted him completely. Isabelle took charge of the moving and decorating process, often sending me photos of expensive furniture and decor items they were considering. I noticed that she always mentioned the prices, sometimes hinting that certain items were just out of reach financially. Although I had already spent a considerable sum on the house itself, I found myself offering to buy several of these items as housewarming gifts. Thomas called me less frequently during this period. When we did speak, our conversations revolved around practical matters related to the house rather than our usual heart-to-heart talks. I missed our closeness but rationalized that he was simply busy with work and the move. 2 weeks after they moved into the new house, I received an invitation to their housewarming party. The formal, printed invitation seemed oddly impersonal coming from my own son, but I was excited nonetheless. I spent days shopping for the perfect outfit and housewarming gift, eventually selecting a handcrafted grandfather clock that reminded me of one Richard's parents had owned. When I arrived at the party, I was struck by how many guests were present, most of them strangers to me. Isabelle's family and friends dominated the gathering, while I recognized only a handful of Thomas's colleagues. Thomas greeted me warmly but was quickly pulled away by other guests. I found myself standing alone, clutching my carefully wrapped gift, feeling oddly out of place in a house I had purchased. Isabelle approached me with air kisses and a flute of champagne. She took the grandfather clock with a polite thank you but quickly handed it off to a housekeeper without opening it. Throughout the evening I watched as she showcased the house to her friends, accepting compliments on their beautiful home without any mention of my contribution. During dinner, I was seated at a table far from Thomas and Isabelle, surrounded by distant acquaintances of theirs who seemed uninterested in conversation with me. From across the room, I observed Isabelle's mother, Vivian, seated in the position that would traditionally be reserved for the mother of the son. The slight was subtle but unmistakable. After dinner, Isabelle clinked her glass and made a speech thanking everyone for coming to celebrate their new home. She spoke about how hard Thomas had worked to afford such a beautiful house, and raised a toast to their future children who would grow up in these rooms. My contribution went unmentioned, as though the house had materialized through their efforts alone. Later, I overheard a conversation between Isabelle and her mother in the kitchen. Vivian was asking about my involvement and Isabelle responded, "Margaret helped a little with the down payment, but we're handling the rest. Thomas doesn't want her too involved in our financial decisions." The deliberate misrepresentation stung deeply. I had not helped a little, but had paid for the entire house. More painful was hearing that Thomas apparently wanted to minimize my involvement. Was this truly his wish, or was Isabelle speaking for him? As the party wound down, Thomas finally had a moment to speak with me privately. He seemed happy but distant, asking polite questions about my health rather than engaging in meaningful conversation. When I mentioned looking forward to spending more time with them in their new home, perhaps Sunday dinners or holiday gatherings, his expression flickered with discomfort. "Let's see how things go, Mom," he said vaguely. "Isabelle likes to keep our schedule flexible, and we're both so busy with work." In that moment I felt a profound disconnection from my son. The boy I had raised, who once couldn't wait to tell me about his day, now seemed to be keeping me at arm's length. Still, I smiled and told him I understood, not wanting to create tension in his new home. The following weeks brought more evidence of my changing relationship with Thomas. My calls often went to voicemail, and his responses to my messages became increasingly brief. When I suggested stopping by with homemade cookies, a tradition from his childhood, Isabelle texted back saying they were on strict diets preparing for an upcoming beach vacation. Then came the conversation about the cruise. Thomas mentioned casually during a rare phone call that he and Isabelle were planning a 2-week Mediterranean cruise. I expressed genuine excitement for them, asking about their itinerary and which countries they planned to visit. "Actually, Mom," Thomas said hesitantly, "we're not going alone. Isabelle's parents are coming too. It's kind of a family trip." The implication that Isabelle's parents were family, while I was not hung in the air between us. I swallowed my hurt and responded with forced cheerfulness. "That sounds wonderful. The 4 of you will have a great time." There was a pause before Thomas said, "I was thinking, maybe you'd like to join us? I'd have to check with Isabelle, of course, but it might be nice to have you along." The tentative nature of his invitation, contingent on his wife's approval, was painful to hear. Nevertheless, I felt a surge of hope. Perhaps this cruise could be an opportunity to reconnect with Thomas and even develop a better relationship with Isabelle and her parents. "I'd love that, Thomas," I replied sincerely. "Just let me know the details and I'll make it work." He promised to discuss it with Isabelle and get back to me. That night, I allowed myself to imagine strolling through Mediterranean ports with my son, sharing new experiences and rebuilding our bond. I even went online to research appropriate cruise wear and shore excursions that might interest all of us. Little did I know that this cruise would become the catalyst for a painful confrontation that would change everything. 3 days after our conversation about the cruise, I still hadn't heard back from Thomas. I decided to call him, hoping for confirmation so I could book my ticket. When he didn't answer, I left a cheerful voicemail asking about the cruise details and mentioning that I'd been researching the ports they planned to visit. Hours later, instead of a return call, I received a text message that would change our relationship forever. The blue bubble appeared on my phone screen with words that felt like physical blows. "Mom, about the cruise. After discussing it with Isabelle, we think it's best if you don't join us after all. Isabelle prefers to keep this trip just family. I'm sure you understand. We can have dinner when we return." I read the message multiple times, each reading more painful than the last. The phrase "just family" echoed in my mind. If I wasn't family, what was I? And after purchasing their entire house, this exclusion felt not just hurtful but profoundly unjust. My hands shaking, I tried calling Thomas immediately. The call went straight to voicemail. I left a message asking him to please call me back, trying to keep my voice steady despite the tears streaming down my face. Then I tried again. And again. Each time straight to voicemail. That evening I received another text from Thomas. "Sorry I can't talk right now. We're having dinner with Isabelle's parents to finalize the cruise details. I'll call tomorrow." The casual dismissal, coupled with the mention of dinner with his in-laws while avoiding conversation with me, was the final straw. Something broke inside me at that moment, a dam of emotions I had been holding back since Thomas and Isabelle's relationship began. I spent a sleepless night replaying years of interactions in my mind. The gradual distancing, the subtle and not-so-subtle exclusions, the way Isabelle controlled access to my son. Most painfully, I confronted Thomas's willing participation in this dynamic. He wasn't an innocent bystander but an active participant in pushing me to the margins of his life. By morning, grief had hardened into resolve. I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my financial advisor, instructing him to immediately halt the remaining payments on the house. Although I had paid the full purchase price into escrow, the funds were being released in scheduled payments to the seller. The second call was to my attorney, asking him to meet me as soon as possible. My attorney, Jonathan, arrived at my home that afternoon with concern etched on his face. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, showing him the text messages and detailing the history of my financial support. Jonathan listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. "Margaret," he said when I finished, "legally speaking, if you put the house in their names as a gift, there's little recourse for recovering those funds. However, if the property hasn't been fully transferred yet, we might have options." It turned out that my impulsive generosity had a silver lining. Because of the structure of the payment schedule to the seller, and because the final paperwork transferring ownership was still pending, we could potentially halt the process. Jonathan explained that we could notify the escrow company of a dispute, which would temporarily freeze the transaction. This will likely create significant conflict with Thomas and Isabelle, Jonathan warned. Are you prepared for that? The question gave me pause. Was I ready to take such a drastic step that would undoubtedly damage my relationship with my son? But then I remembered his text message. Isabelle prefers to keep this trip just family. If I wasn't family to them, despite everything I had sacrificed, perhaps it was time to accept that painful reality and act accordingly. Yes, I said firmly. I'm prepared. Jonathan nodded and began making calls from my living room. Within hours, he had set the legal process in motion. The escrow company agreed to halt further payments pending resolution of the dispute, and Jonathan filed preliminary paperwork to contest the gift status of the funds already transferred. That evening, my phone exploded with notifications. Multiple missed calls from Thomas, several voicemails, and a barrage of text messages. I listened to the first voicemail, Thomas's voice frantic and angry. "Mom, what the hell is going on? The realtor just called saying there's a problem with the house payment. Call me back immediately." The texts escalated in urgency and anger. "Mom, pick up your phone. You can't do this to us. We've already moved in. Isabelle is having a breakdown. How could you do this to us? This is completely unfair and probably illegal. Our attorney will be contacting you." I turned off my phone, unable to bear the onslaught. The next morning, I turned it back on to find 28 missed calls and numerous text messages, including several from unknown numbers that turned out to be Isabelle and her parents. I forwarded them all to Jonathan without reading them. Later that day, Thomas and Isabelle appeared at my door unannounced. Through the peephole, I could see Thomas's flushed, angry face and Isabelle's tear-stained one. I took a deep breath and opened the door. "How could you do this to us?" Thomas demanded before I could speak, pushing past me into the entryway. "We trusted you." Isabelle followed, her composure cracking. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? The sellers are threatening to sue us. Our credit will be ruined." I closed the door quietly and faced them. "Please sit down. I think we need to have an honest conversation." "There's nothing to discuss," Thomas shot back. "You promised to buy us this house, and now you're going back on your word. That's all there is to it." "Is that really all there is to it?" I asked, surprising myself with how calm I felt. "Let me ask you something, Thomas. Am I your family?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "What? Of course you are. What does that have to do with anything?" I took out my phone and opened his text message. "You said, and I quote, 'Isabelle prefers to keep this trip just family.' If I'm not included in just family, then what am I to you?" Thomas had the grace to look uncomfortable. "That's not what I meant. You're twisting my words." "There's no twist needed," I replied. "The words are quite clear. After I paid $1.5 million for your house, I wasn't considered family enough to join a cruise with Isabelle's parents." "This is ridiculous," Isabelle interjected. "You're holding our house hostage because you weren't invited on a cruise? How petty can you be?" I turned to her, maintaining my composure. "This isn't about the cruise, Isabelle. It's about years of being gradually pushed out of my son's life. It's about paying for an entire house and not even being acknowledged at your housewarming party. It's about realizing that my role in your lives is solely as a financial resource, not as a mother or mother-in-law." Thomas's expression shifted from anger to discomfort. "Mom, that's not fair. We appreciate everything you've done for us." "Do you?" I asked. "Because appreciation usually involves acknowledgment, gratitude, and inclusion. I've experienced none of those things." The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, cycling through anger, accusations, attempts at justification, and finally, a grudging recognition of my perspective. Thomas admitted that he had allowed Isabelle's preferences to dictate our relationship, while Isabelle maintained that I had misinterpreted her actions, though she struggled to explain the just family text. By the end, we reached an impasse. They wanted me to reinstate the house payments. I wanted acknowledgment of my place in their lives and concrete changes in how they treated me. We parted without resolution, the house situation still in limbo. The days following our confrontation were filled with tense communications. Thomas called repeatedly, his approach alternating between anger, emotional manipulation, and attempts at reconciliation. Isabelle sent a carefully worded email apologizing for any misunderstandings, while still maintaining that I was overreacting to the cruise situation. I held firm to my position, supported by daily conversations with Jonathan, who kept me informed of the legal proceedings. The escrow company had officially frozen the remaining funds, and we had filed paperwork to potentially recover a portion of the money already transferred. A week after our initial confrontation, I received an unexpected visit from Vivian, Isabelle's mother. Her arrival at my modest apartment seemed to physically pain her, her expression one of distaste as she surveyed my comfortable but simple furnishings. "Margaret," she began without preamble after I invited her in, "this situation has gone far enough. You're causing my daughter tremendous distress." I offered her tea, which she declined with a dismissive wave. "I'm not here to socialize. I'm here to resolve this house situation." "I'm listening," I said, taking a seat across from her. Vivian straightened her designer jacket. "It's quite simple. You made a commitment to purchase the house for Thomas and Isabelle. Now you're reneging on that commitment because of some perceived slight about a cruise. It's childish and beneath someone of your age." Her condescension was remarkable. I studied her for a moment before responding. "Vivian, do you consider me part of your family?" The question clearly caught her off guard. "Excuse me. It's a simple question. Through our children's marriage we are connected. Do you consider me family?" Vivian shifted uncomfortably. "Well, technically, I suppose we are related by marriage. But not family," I pressed. "Not in the way you and your husband are family to Thomas and Isabelle." "I don't see the relevance of this line of questioning," she said stiffly. "The relevance is that I was explicitly excluded from a family cruise that included you and your husband. The message from my son stated that his wife wanted to keep the trip, just family. Clearly indicating that I don't qualify as family in your collective view." Vivian had the grace to look slightly discomfited. "That was unfortunate phrasing. I'm sure Thomas didn't mean to imply." "But that's exactly what he implied," I interrupted. "And it wasn't the first time I've been made to feel like an outsider. At the housewarming party for a house I paid for, I was seated far away from my son while you occupied the place of honor. Isabelle has consistently limited my access to Thomas, and he has allowed it. After a lifetime of sacrificing everything for my son, I've been relegated to the role of convenient banker." Vivian's expression hardened. "So this is about money then? You want recognition for your financial contribution?" "No," I said firmly. "This is about respect, inclusion, and acknowledging my place in my son's life. The money is simply where I finally drew the line. I won't be used financially while being discarded emotionally." Our conversation deteriorated from there. Vivian alternated between thinly veiled threats about legal action and attempts to make me feel guilty about the position I was putting Thomas and Isabelle in. When these tactics failed, she finally resorted to honesty. "Look, Margaret," she said, her voice lowered as though sharing a confidence. "Thomas and Isabelle are building a life in our social circle. They have certain appearances to maintain, certain connections to cultivate. Your background and, frankly, your lack of social graces make these efforts more challenging." The blatant elitism stunned me into momentary silence. When I found my voice, it was steady and clear. "Thank you for your honesty, Vivian. You've just confirmed everything I suspected. Please leave my home now." After Vivian's departure, I made a decision that had been forming in my mind for days. I called Jonathan and instructed him to proceed with selling the house. If ownership hadn't been fully transferred to Thomas and Isabelle, and if we could legally reclaim it, I wanted it sold as quickly as possible. "Are you certain about this?" Jonathan asked. "It will likely end your relationship with your son." "My relationship with my son ended when he decided I wasn't family," I replied, the words painful but true. "I'm just acknowledging the reality of the situation." That evening, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a man introduced himself as Robert Lawrence, Isabelle's father. Margaret, he began, his tone businesslike. This situation has gotten out of hand. I'd like to propose a solution. I'm listening, I said. Vivian mentioned your concerns about being excluded from family activities. I understand that might have been hurtful. We're prepared to include you in future gatherings and acknowledge your contribution to the house purchase more publicly. His offer was presented like a business negotiation, complete with concessions and terms. There was no genuine warmth, no recognition of the deeper emotional issues at play. And in return? I asked, although I already knew the answer. In return, you'll reinstate the house payments and drop any legal claims to recover funds already transferred. I considered his offer for a moment before responding. Robert, I appreciate your attempt at negotiation, but this isn't a business deal. This is about my relationship with my son, which has been systematically undermined. Your offer of grudging inclusion doesn't address the fundamental issue. And what is that issue exactly? He asked, his frustration evident. Respect, I said simply. Genuine inclusion. Recognition that I am Thomas's mother, and an important part of his life, not because of my financial resources but because of our lifelong bond. Robert's sigh was audible. Margaret, be reasonable. Thomas is a grown man with his own family now. His primary loyalty should be to his wife. I never suggested otherwise, I replied. But becoming a husband doesn't require becoming a distant son. Those roles can coexist with proper boundaries and mutual respect. The conversation ended in another stalemate. Robert, like Vivian, seemed incapable of understanding my perspective, viewing the situation purely through a transactional lens. Later that night, Thomas called again. His voice sounded tired, defeated. Mom, why are you doing this? We can work this out without destroying our relationship. I'm not the one who destroyed our relationship, Thomas, I said gently. That happened gradually over time, as you allowed Isabelle and her family to push me to the margins of your life. That's not fair, he protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? When was the last time you called me just to talk, not because you needed something? When was the last time you stood up to Isabelle when she made plans that excluded me? When was the last time you acknowledged all I've sacrificed for you? His silence was answer enough. I don't regret a single sacrifice I made for you, Thomas, I continued. I would do it all again in a heartbeat, but I won't continue to finance a lifestyle that has no place for me except as a checkbook. So what happens now? He asked quietly. Now we both face the consequences of our choices. You chose to exclude me from your family, and I'm choosing to withdraw my financial support. The house will be sold, and we'll move forward separately. His sharp intake of breath was followed by a desperate plea. Mom, please. We can't lose this house. We've already moved in. All our friends know about it. Isabelle will be devastated. I'm sorry for that, I said sincerely, but I'm also devastated by being treated as an outsider by my only child. The call ended with Thomas angry and frustrated, and me exhausted but resolute. That night I wrote a long email to Thomas, expressing my love for him, detailing the history of our relationship, and explaining why I had finally reached my breaking point. I didn't expect it to change his mind, but I needed him to understand my perspective, even if he couldn't accept it. The next morning, Jonathan called with news. The legal situation was complicated, but it appeared we could indeed reclaim and sell the house, though it would involve a lengthy legal process. Alternatively, we could negotiate a settlement with Thomas and Isabelle. What kind of settlement? I asked. They could refinance the house with a mortgage and pay you back a portion of your investment, Jonathan explained. It wouldn't recover the full amount, but it might be a compromise that preserves some relationship with your son. I considered this option carefully. Did I want to cut ties completely with Thomas? Despite everything, he was still my son, the little boy I had raised alone, the center of my world for so many years. But he was also the man who had allowed me to be pushed aside, who had defined family in a way that excluded me. After much reflection, I decided to offer Thomas and Isabelle a choice. They could either vacate the house and allow it to be sold, or they could take out a mortgage for half the home's value and pay me back that amount. It wasn't about recovering the money as much as it was about ensuring they recognized the value of what they had so casually dismissed. I drafted the offer with Jonathan's help and sent it to Thomas via email, giving them 1 week to decide. The week of waiting was one of the most difficult periods of my life. Thomas didn't respond to my email immediately, and I forced myself not to contact him, giving him space to consider the options without pressure. To distract myself, I began volunteering at a local community center, finding solace in helping others while my own life was in turmoil. 5 days after sending the email, I received a response from Thomas. His message was brief, asking if we could meet in person to discuss the situation. I agreed, suggesting a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. When I arrived at the cafe the following afternoon, Thomas was already there, sitting alone at a corner table. Isabelle's absence was conspicuous, and I felt a mix of relief and concern. Relief at not having to face her antagonism, concern about what her absence might signify. Thomas stood as I approached, his expression guarded but not hostile. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes and a slight slump to his shoulders that hadn't been there before. We exchanged awkward greetings before sitting down. "Thank you for meeting me," he began after we'd ordered coffee. "I wanted to talk face to face about your proposal." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "Isabelle and I have been doing a lot of thinking," he said, his fingers nervously tapping the table. "Your email. It made me see things differently. Not completely, but enough to recognize that I haven't treated you fairly." His admission, however partial, caught me by surprise. I had expected more defensiveness, more justification of their behavior. "The past week has been difficult," he continued. "Isabelle and I have had some very honest conversations about our relationship with you, about the house, about our priorities. We've also talked with her parents." At the mention of Robert and Vivian, I tensed slightly. Thomas noticed and gave a small, sad smile. "I know you don't think much of them right now, and I understand why. They've been influential in how Isabelle and I structured our life together, including our relationship with you. Too influential, I see that now." He took a deep breath before continuing. "We've decided to accept your second option. We'll take out a mortgage for half the house's value and pay you back. It's the right thing to do, and honestly, it's more than fair given how much you contributed." I studied my son's face, trying to gauge his sincerity. "And Isabelle agrees with this decision?" A flicker of discomfort crossed his features. "She's coming to terms with it. This situation has forced us to have some difficult conversations about money, family loyalty, and values. We're not completely aligned yet, but we're working on it." "And the cruise?" I couldn't help asking. "Are you still going?" Thomas had the grace to look ashamed. "We've canceled it. It didn't seem right to take a luxury vacation while dealing with this situation. And truthfully, Mom, I didn't want to go without you, not after realizing how hurtful that exclusion was." His words touched me, but I remained cautious. "Thomas, I appreciate what you're saying, but I need to know this isn't just about securing the house. Our relationship needs to change fundamentally if we're going to move forward." "I know," he said quietly, "and I can't promise overnight transformation. Isabelle and I have built patterns that will take time to change. Her parents will still be part of our lives, and there will be challenges as we reset boundaries. But I want to try, Mom. I miss who we used to be." His vulnerability in that moment reminded me of the little boy who would crawl into my lap after a bad dream, seeking comfort and reassurance. Despite everything, my love for him remained undiminished, though now tempered with a new awareness of his flaws. "I want that too," I admitted. "But I need more than words, Thomas. I need consistent actions that show I'm valued as your mother, not just as a financial resource." We talked for nearly 3 hours, delving into painful truths and long-suppressed feelings. Thomas admitted that he had allowed Isabelle's desire for status and her parents' influence to override his own values. He acknowledged how gradually I had been sidelined in their lives, not through a deliberate decision but through a series of small concessions and choices. I shared my perspective as well, the hurt of watching him drift away, the pain of being excluded from significant moments, the shock of realizing I wasn't considered family, despite everything we had shared. By the time we parted, we had reached a tentative understanding. Thomas and Isabelle would proceed with obtaining a mortgage and repaying half the house's value. More importantly, We had established new expectations for our relationship moving forward, including regular one-on-one time between Thomas and me, clearer communication, and a commitment to addressing issues directly rather than allowing them to fester. As Thomas hugged me goodbye, he whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom. I lost sight of what really matters. I won't make that mistake again." I wanted to believe him, but only time would tell if his actions would match his words. The following months brought significant changes to my relationship with Thomas and Isabelle. True to their word, they secured a mortgage and began repaying me for half the house's value. The legal issues were resolved, with Jonathan drafting an agreement that protected both parties' interests while allowing them to remain in the home. More meaningful than the financial resolution were the shifts in our personal interactions. Thomas began calling me regularly, often during his commute home from work, just to chat about his day or ask about mine. These conversations felt like a return to an earlier time in our relationship, before Isabelle and her family had come between us. Isabelle's transformation was more gradual and complex. Initially, she maintained a polite but distant demeanor during our interactions, clearly struggling with the new dynamic. However, as weeks passed, I noticed subtle changes in her behavior. She began including me in some of their social plans, asking my opinion on home decorating decisions, and occasionally reaching out independently of Thomas. A breakthrough came 3 months after our confrontation. Isabelle invited me to lunch, just the two of us. Over salads at a quiet restaurant, she offered what felt like a genuine apology. "Margaret," she began hesitantly, "I've been doing a lot of thinking about how I've treated you. I realize now that I was insecure about your relationship with Thomas and worried about measuring up to your influence in his life. Instead of addressing those feelings, I tried to minimize your role, which was unfair and hurtful." Her honesty surprised me. "Thank you for saying that, Isabelle. I never wanted to compete with you for Thomas's attention or affection. There's room in his life for both of us in different roles." She nodded. "I see that now. And I also see how my parents' attitudes influenced me. They've always been very focused on social status and appearances. I brought those values into my marriage without questioning them. We didn't become best friends overnight, but that lunch marked the beginning of a more authentic relationship between us. We began to discover common interests beyond our connection to Thomas, and I found myself genuinely enjoying some of our interactions. Thomas and Isabelle's relationship with her parents also evolved. While they remained close, Thomas began establishing clearer boundaries, particularly regarding decisions that affected our family dynamics. This occasionally created tension, but it was a healthy adjustment that allowed Thomas to balance his roles as husband and son. 6 months after our confrontation, Thomas and Isabelle invited me to dinner at their home, the house that had nearly driven us apart. The evening felt different from previous visits. My photo had been added to the family gallery wall. I was seated at the place of honor at their dining table, and both Thomas and Isabelle made efforts to include me in their conversations and plans. After dinner, Thomas took me on a tour of the house, pointing out changes they had made since my last visit. In the guest bedroom, he paused, looking slightly nervous. "Mom, we wanted to show you something," he said, opening the closet door. Inside, a small section had been cleared, with a few empty hangers and a drawer labeled with my name. "We thought you might like to keep some things here, for when you visit. If you want to stay over sometimes, we'd like that." The simple gesture moved me deeply. It wasn't just about the physical space, but what it represented: acknowledgement of my place in their lives, a standing invitation to be present, a concrete symbol of inclusion. That night, as Thomas walked me to my car, he said something that healed a wound I hadn't fully acknowledged. "You know, Mom, when I think about family, you're at the very center of that circle. I lost sight of that for a while, but I won't again. You're not just my mother. You're my foundation." The journey wasn't always smooth. There were setbacks, moments when old patterns reasserted themselves, times when Isabelle's parents attempted to reclaim their dominant influence. But with each challenge, we found our way back to the new understanding we had established, often emerging stronger for having navigated the difficulty together. 1 year after the text message that had shattered my world, Thomas and Isabelle invited me to join them on a Mediterranean cruise, along with Isabelle's parents. The invitation came with no qualifications or hesitations. I was simply included as family. Though part of me was tempted to decline to protect myself from potential hurt, I chose to accept, seeing it as an opportunity to continue building our new relationship. The cruise itself was a microcosm of our evolving dynamic. There were moments of tension, particularly with Vivian, who struggled to adapt to the more balanced family structure. But there were also moments of genuine connection, beautiful sunsets shared with Thomas on the ship's deck, surprising commonalities discovered with Robert over chess in the ship's library, and even a few enjoyable shopping excursions with Isabelle in port cities. By the time we returned, something fundamental had shifted. We had navigated 2 weeks in close quarters, and emerged not just intact but somehow more cohesive. The artificial hierarchy that had once placed Isabelle's family above me had begun to dissolve, replaced by a more equitable recognition of each person's place in the extended family constellation. 2 years have passed since that fateful text message about the cruise. Looking back, I can see how that painful moment became a catalyst for necessary change, forcing us to confront issues that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Thomas and Isabelle still live in the house, now properly mortgaged with monthly payments coming to me. They've made it truly their own, and I feel welcome there in a way I never did before our confrontation. Last Christmas, they hosted the family gathering, with both Isabelle's parents and me included as equal guests of honor. The most significant development came 6 months ago when Isabelle announced she was pregnant. When they learned they were expecting a girl, Thomas called me immediately, before anyone else. "Mom," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We want to name her after you. Your middle name, Grace. If that's okay with you." The gesture represented everything I had hoped for: recognition, respect, and a place in the future of our family. I accepted through happy tears, deeply moved by their decision. My relationship with Isabelle has continued to evolve in positive ways. As her pregnancy progressed, she began seeking my advice and perspective more frequently. The experience of becoming a mother herself seems to have given her a new appreciation for my role in Thomas's life. We'll never have the easy closeness that some mothers and daughters-in-law enjoy, but we've developed a mutual respect that allows us to coexist harmoniously and even enjoy each other's company. Vivian and Robert have also adjusted, albeit more slowly. The impending arrival of their first grandchild has softened some of Vivian's sharp edges, and Robert has shown unexpected warmth in his preparations for the baby. We've established a cautious truce, acknowledging our shared connection to Thomas, Isabelle, and soon baby Grace. As for me, the inheritance from my brother has allowed me to travel and pursue interests I had set aside during the years of raising Thomas. I've developed new friendships through my volunteer work and even begun dating again, something I had never expected at this stage of life. The financial aspect of our conflict has faded in importance. Yes, Thomas and Isabelle continue to make their mortgage payments, but the money no longer represents a point of contention or power. Instead, it's simply a practical arrangement that works for all of us. I've established a trust for baby Grace's education with some of these funds, continuing the cycle of family support in a healthier, more balanced way. What remains most valuable from this difficult chapter is the lesson we all learned about the true meaning of family. It's not defined by cruise invitations or seating arrangements at parties. It's not measured in financial contributions or social status. Family is about mutual respect, honoring relationships, and making space for each person's unique role. Thomas put it best during a recent conversation. "You know, Mom, I think we needed that crisis to understand what we were losing. Sometimes you don't appreciate what's most important until you almost lose it completely." He was right. The painful text message that once broke my heart eventually led to healing deeper wounds and building a stronger, more authentic family bond. Sometimes the hardest moments become unexpected gifts, forcing us to confront uncomfortable truths and grow beyond our limitations. If you've ever experienced family conflict or felt excluded by loved ones, I hope my story offers some perspective. Standing up for yourself doesn't mean giving up on relationships. It means valuing them enough to demand authenticity and respect. The path may be difficult, but the resulting connections can be far more meaningful than the superficial harmony maintained through silence and sacrifice. Have you ever had to establish boundaries with family members? Did it strengthen your relationship in the long run, or create a permanent rift? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. And remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to speak your truth, even when it's painful. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to build genuine connections in all your relationships.